The courthouse loomed like a cathedral of justice, its marble facade glinting under the early morning sun. Washington, D.C., pulsed outside with the nervous energy of reporters, camera crews, and political operatives. Horns honked in the distance. But inside, the air was thick with anticipation, almost sacred in its stillness. Every footstep echoed against polished floors, every whisper felt amplified. Jasmine Crockett sat at a polished oak table near the back of the courtroom, her laptop open, a stack of carefully organized files beside her. She adjusted her glasses and ran her fingers over the notes she had meticulously prepared for weeks. Every fact, every timeline, every cross-reference was in order. This wasn't just a legal proceeding, it was a chance to expose truths that had been buried for years, hidden behind layers of power and privilege. Her pulse quickened, but her face remained composed, a mask of calm determination. Outside, news vans lined the streets like a parade of modern-day war chariots. Antennas jutted into the sky and camera lenses swiveled, capturing every detail of the courthouse steps. Reporters whispered into microphones, speculating on what might unfold, their words dripping with both excitement and fear. Social media buzzed with live updates, tweets, and hashtags ready to explode the moment the courtroom doors opened. Inside, the judge's gavel sat silently, a symbol of authority waiting to descend. Trump's lawyers huddled together near the front, flipping through papers with an air of practiced confidence. And somewhere beyond the courtroom walls, Donald Trump himself prepared, unaware that today would demand more than his usual bravado. Jasmine's mind replayed the events that had led her here. Late nights spent poring over leaked documents, anonymous tips, and confidential correspondence. Each revelation had its own gravity, a silent pulse threatening to shatter the carefully constructed veneer of political theater. She took a deep breath, letting the weight of responsibility settle in her chest. "This isn't about spectacle," she murmured under her breath. "It's about truth." A clerk called the court to order. The heavy doors swung open with a resonant thud. In the doorway stood Trump, flanked by his security detail, his expression a mix of arrogance and calculation. Cameras flashed in rapid succession, capturing every second. The room shifted slightly as if it had collectively inhaled. Jasmine rose subtly from her chair. Smoothing her blazer, she caught his eye across the room. Feeling a silent challenge pass between them, Trump offered a faint, dismissive smirk, a shield of confidence she had seen countless times in press briefings and debates. But Jasmine wasn't here to be intimidated. She felt the quiet power of her preparation, the moral weight of the evidence she carried, and the invisible audience watching the unfolding drama. The judge's gavel finally struck, breaking the tension, like a bell tolling over a city poised on the brink. Every movement, every glance, every subtle gesture mattered now. The gathering storm had arrived, and the courtroom, silent yet brimming with expectation, became the eye of it. Jasmine sat back slightly, her eyes narrowing as the first words were spoken. The battle between truth and power had officially begun. The doors swung open again, this time with a controlled flourish that seemed almost choreographed. Donald Trump entered the courtroom with his usual mixture of bravado and theatricality, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor like drumbeats, heralding a parade of power. His suit was immaculate, a dark armor against the scrutiny that awaited him. The entourage trailing behind exuded an aura of cultivated loyalty, each step measured, each glance calculating. Camera flashes erupted instantly, staccato bursts of light illuminating the courtroom with a surreal, almost otherworldly intensity. Reporters whispered feverishly, capturing every flicker of expression. Trump raised a hand in a wave that was more about optics than greeting, his smile wide, practiced, and deliberately unyielding. The crowd of spectators and journalists sensed the tension behind the performance, a storm ready to break. Jasmine's gaze followed him like a hawk tracking prey. She observed his every gesture, the tilt of his head, the subtle tightening around his eyes, the way he shifted weight from one foot to another as if measuring the battlefield before him. Beneath the swagger, she detected the faint edge of unease, a crack in the armor that would later prove vital. "Order in the court," the judge's voice rang out. Cutting through the buzz, the room settled. Though the electricity of anticipation still hummed in the air, Trump approached the front, shaking hands with his legal team, exchanging quick whispers that seemed almost conspiratorial. He exuded a sense of control, but Jasmine had learned to read between the theatrics the confident mask often concealed fragility. Under pressure, the press leaned forward, microphones and cameras poised. Every movement, every word was being dissected, analyzed, and broadcast in real time. Social media had already erupted with speculation. Hashtag Trump courtroom drama. Hashtag Crockett v. Trump. Hashtag secrets exposed. Jasmine felt the invisible weight of millions watching. This wasn't a courtroom alone. It was a stage for the nation, perhaps the world, to witness a collision between secrecy and accountability. Trump finally took his seat, the chair groaning slightly under his presence, a subtle reminder of the physicality he wielded as an extension of persona. He leaned back, folding his arms, surveying the room with a measured gaze that suggested challenge, defiance, and a quiet warning. His voice, when it came, was a low rumble of authority. "Let's see what all this fuss is about," he said, almost casually, though the room knew it was anything but casual. Jasmine adjusted her papers, her fingers brushing over the edge of a confidential file she had memorized inside and out. She felt the weight of history pressing down upon her. This moment would define more than the outcome of a case. It would set the tone for public perception, media narrative, and political consequence. The first volleys of exchange were about to begin, and the quiet tension in the courtroom became a taut wire, vibrating with anticipation. The judge's eyes swept across the room, pausing on each player like a conductor preparing to unleash a symphony. Jasmine's pulse quickened. Today, truth and performance would collide. The air was heavy with the promise of revelation, and everyone could sense the first move would ignite a cascade that no one could fully control. The night before the hearing had been long, sleepless, and suffused with a quiet kind of dread. Jasmine Crockett sat alone in her apartment, the city lights of Washington flickering through the blinds like distant signals of the storm she knew was coming. On her desk, files were stacked in precise order, legal briefs annotated with a meticulous hand, each margin crowded with notes, observations, and questions that demanded answers. A single lamp bathed the room in a warm, solitary glow, highlighting the sharp angles of her determined face. She sipped lukewarm coffee, letting it anchor her racing thoughts. In the silence, she replayed the footage she had obtained, the emails, the recordings, the confidential correspondence. Each detail had been verified, cross-checked, and corroborated, but the weight of responsibility pressed down harder with every passing hour. One misstep, one overreach, and the narrative could crumble, leaving her exposed, vulnerable, and dismissed as just another lawyer chasing headlines. Her mind drifted back to the first tip that had led her here, an anonymous message containing hints of hidden dealings and shadowy political maneuvers. At the time, it had seemed almost too fantastical to believe, but as the layers of truth unfolded, she had realized the enormity of the stakes. This wasn't just a case of corporate misdeeds or financial improprieties. It was a challenge to the very integrity of public office, a confrontation with power at its most audacious. Jasmine closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She felt the tremor of fear that sometimes bubbled up in the quiet hours, the doubt that whispered, "Do you really have the courage to go all the way?" But she remembered the faces of ordinary citizens, the countless Americans whose voices had been drowned out by privilege and secrecy. That thought steeled her resolve. This wasn't about glory or political gain. It was about truth, accountability, and the moral obligation to shine a light into the shadows. She opened a new file, reviewing a key piece of evidence, a video recording that, if released in court, could expose the hidden machinations of a powerful figure. Her fingers hovered over the folder, a mixture of anticipation and anxiety coursing through her veins. She knew the moment would come when the courtroom and the world would witness what she had uncovered. As she rehearsed her approach, Jasmine whispered aloud, almost as if speaking to an invisible jury, "This isn't just about him, it's about everyone who's ever been told their voice doesn't matter." Her words echoed against the quiet walls, a mantra to fortify her spirit. She imagined the courtroom the next morning, the cameras trained on every expression, The reporters poised to broadcast, the public waiting with bated breath. In the corner of her apartment, her phone buzzed a text from a trusted colleague. "Ready for tomorrow." Jasmine smiled faintly, her jaw tightening with determination. She typed a brief reply. "I've never been more ready." The hours passed slowly, each tick of the clock marking the approach of a pivotal moment. She reviewed her notes again, rehearsed potential questions, anticipated objections, and considered every possible maneuver her opposition might employ. She visualized herself standing before the judge, her voice clear, unwavering, and sharp enough to cut through deception. Finally, she leaned back in her chair, exhausted but resolute. The city outside seemed almost still, unaware that history was about to be written within the walls of a courthouse. Jasmine closed her eyes, whispering one last affirmation: "Tomorrow, the world will know." And with that, she allowed herself a fleeting moment of rest, knowing that when dawn broke, the quiet tension of preparation would explode into the public spectacle she had meticulously planned, and the gathering storm would finally break. The courtroom buzzed with an undercurrent of tension as Jasmine Crockett rose from her chair, her polished shoes barely making a sound on the marble floor. The judge's gavel had already struck twice, signaling that the proceedings were officially underway. But the atmosphere felt far heavier than the mere formality of protocol. Every eye was on her: the press, the spectators, Trump's legal team, and even the cameras broadcasting live across the nation. Millions were watching, and every movement carried weight. She began methodically, her voice calm but firm. "Your Honor, I would like to introduce evidence that speaks directly to the integrity of this office and the actions taken behind closed doors." The room fell almost silent, save for the faint shuffle of papers and the whisper of a microphone being adjusted. Trump's smirk flickered, a fraction too quickly to hide the flicker of concern beneath his practiced demeanor. Trump's lead attorney immediately rose, objections ready on their tongues. "Your Honor, this evidence is speculative at best and prejudicial at worst." Jasmine held up a hand, cutting through the objection with precision. "With all due respect, counsel, the documents have been verified, timestamps confirmed, and they directly relate to the issue of accountability. We are not speculating, we are presenting facts." The judge's eyes narrowed, but he allowed her to continue, sensing the subtle authority in her calm confidence. Jasmine pivoted toward the central table, sliding a set of documents across the polished surface. Each sheet seemed to glint under the courtroom lights, an almost cinematic display of the weight of truth. She could feel the room holding its collective breath as Trump leaned forward, scrutinizing every word with a mixture of skepticism and calculation. "You think this changes anything?" Trump's voice carried a low edge of challenge, almost conversational, but the undercurrent of tension was unmistakable. "Facts are relative, and perception matters more than papers." Jasmine's gaze never wavered. "Perception matters." "Yes," she replied, her tone measured but sharp. "But facts are immutable, and the facts in these documents cannot be ignored." She glanced toward the judge, then back to Trump. "The American people deserve transparency. They deserve truth, not rhetoric." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras zoomed, and a subtle charge passed through the spectators, a recognition that something was shifting. Jasmine's words, measured but piercing, began to tilt the balance. Even the lawyers at Trump's table exchanged uneasy glances, the first sign of cracks in their practiced composure. Trump leaned back, tapping a finger against his desk, as if calculating how to dismantle the momentum building against him. "You think a few documents make you the arbiter of morality?" he asked, his tone laced with mockery. "I've seen bigger claims crumble under far less scrutiny." Jasmine allowed a pause, letting her silence speak volumes. In the courtroom, silence was a weapon as sharp as any legal brief. Then she leaned slightly forward, her voice lowering with quiet intensity. "This isn't about you, Mr. Trump. This is about accountability. You may dismiss it now, but history does not forget the truth when it finally surfaces." The judge's gavel struck once, signaling a brief recess, and the tension in the room didn't dissipate, it thickened. Jasmine returned to her seat, the weight of the first exchange settling in her chest. She had opened the dialogue, planted the seeds of doubt, and exposed the first fissures in Trump's defenses. Outside, the press sensed the drama. Inside, the courtroom had transformed into a crucible where truth, power, and perception collided. As she opened her files again, Jasmine's thoughts raced ahead. The first volley had been fired, but the real battle, emotional, political, and legal, was only beginning. And in the silence between gavel strikes, she knew the storm was about to intensify. The moment Jasmine had laid out her first documents, the courthouse erupted not with chaos, but with the quiet, relentless storm of scrutiny. Outside, news vans multiplied like ants along the wide steps, their antennas thrust skyward, catching every flicker of wireless signal. Reporters leaned from windows, microphones extended, cameras rotating to capture the tableau inside. Social media ignited instantly. Hashtags trending before words had even fully left her lips. Hashtag Crockett v. Trump. Hashtag The Truth Reveled. Hashtag Courtroom Drama. Anchors and commentators debated in live segments, their voices overlapping, almost chaotic. But the core question remained singular. Could one lawyer really pierce the veil of secrecy surrounding Donald Trump? In studios across the nation, analysts dissected every gesture, every glance, every line of evidence Jasmine had presented. They replayed the footage in slow motion, scrutinizing the subtle tension in the courtroom, the flicker of unease on Trump's face, the calm, almost imperceptible nod of her hand as she laid down the files. Inside the courthouse, Jasmine's focus never wavered. She felt the pulse of the world pressing in through the walls, each vibration a reminder of the stakes at hand. Trump's team muttered quietly, strategizing. But Jasmine had anticipated their moves. Every objection, every diversion, only sharpened her clarity. She could feel the momentum beginning to tilt, subtle but undeniable, toward the side of accountability. The courtroom's walls were lined with journalists scribbling notes, capturing every word for broadcast. Each camera lens acted as both witness and amplifier, projecting the tension beyond these marble confines into living rooms, offices, and smartphones nationwide. The hum of electricity was almost palpable, a static energy born of anticipation. Jasmine's pulse matched it, a rhythmic cadence of determination. Outside, demonstrators began to gather, protesters carrying signs reading "Expose the Truth," and accountability now clustered near barricades. The crowd murmured with excitement and apprehension. Cameras held aloft recording every angle. Drones circled overhead, capturing sweeping aerial shots of a city watching a courtroom that had become the epicenter of a national reckoning, even in the private chambers. Jasmine's colleagues were caught in a frenzy of coordination. Lawyers, aides, and consultants buzzed over laptops and phones, transmitting real-time updates to social media teams. Every tweet, every clip, every trending topic was a weapon, a calculated ripple in a sea of information. Jasmine's careful strategy had begun to unfold beyond the courtroom, creating a theater where truth and exposure were inseparable. Trump, meanwhile, remained in his chair, shifting weight subtly, his usual confidence flickering like a candle. In wind, he leaned forward, addressing his lawyers in a low murmur that Jasmine could almost hear despite the distance. Contain it, control the narrative, make them doubt her credibility. But the storm had already begun to roll, unstoppable once set in motion. Jasmine, seated calmly, allowed herself a brief mental acknowledgement. The world was watching, and she had taken the first step in transforming this courtroom into a stage where hidden truths could no longer hide. The stakes were enormous, the pressure relentless, yet she exuded the quiet power of preparedness, the invisible authority of someone who understood both the law and the weight of history. As cameras focused, microphones captured, and fingers typed, Jasmine's mind remained razor-sharp. She knew that the next exchanges would be more personal, more volatile. The media frenzy was not a distraction, it was the amplifier of the storm. She had summoned a wave that would crash against the walls of secrecy. And when the courtroom doors closed again after recess, every eye would turn inward, waiting for the next revelation, the next strike that would tilt this high-stakes drama irreversibly toward truth. The courtroom returned from recess, the tension thicker than ever, the faint echo of the gavel's strike still reverberated in the high ceilings, mingling with the low hum of cameras and whispered conversations. Jasmine Crockett remained seated for a moment, scanning the room, noting every movement, every glance, every twitch. She had planted the seeds, exposed the first cracks, and now she watched as Trump began his counterattack. He rose from his chair with a deliberate swagger, his presence commanding immediate attention. "So this is the grand show?" he asked, voice sharp, laced with both mockery and challenge. "All this fuss over a few papers and some whispers," the courtroom murmured. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised, cameras tracking every flicker of emotion. Trump's lawyers flanked him, nodding subtly, as if to underline their client's confidence. Trump's gaze swept the room, landing squarely on Jasmine. "And you," he continued, his voice lowering with pointed intensity, "think you can stand here and tell the world what's right or wrong? You're just a blogger with a law degree, reading lines from a script someone else wrote." His words were calculated, an attempt to destabilize, to undermine her authority and credibility. Jasmine's eyes narrowed, her jaw tightening imperceptibly. For a moment, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath, suspended between spectacle and consequence. She allowed a measured pause, letting the room absorb the audacity of his attack. Then she stood, her movement precise and deliberate, commanding attention without a word. "You may call me what you like," she replied evenly, her voice carrying across the chamber with unshakable clarity. "But the truth is not defined by labels, it is defined by facts, and facts are what I bring to this court today." Her tone was calm, but it radiated a quiet authority that seemed to ripple through the air. Trump's smirk faltered for the briefest fraction of a second, unnoticed by most, but registered by those attuned to subtle shifts in demeanor. He leaned forward, tapping a finger against the table, a gesture meant to project confidence, but now revealing tension under the pressure of scrutiny. "Facts, really? You think documents and timelines can topple what I've built?" His voice rose slightly, an edge creeping into his controlled performance. "People don't care about minutiae. They care about perception, about who seems powerful, who seems in control. And right now," he paused dramatically, sweeping his gaze across the courtroom, "I am in control." Jasmine stepped closer, her posture unwavering. Her eyes locked on his. "Control is temporary," she said softly, but with the weight of certainty. "Accountability lasts, and those who hide behind power are eventually exposed." The words landed with precision, quiet but penetrating, like a scalpel through pretense. Trump's team exchanged hurried glances, realizing that the first strategic salvo had shifted, and Jasmine had seized the momentum. Cameras captured every subtle change in expression, every minuscule reaction, the beginning of a courtroom theater where emotion, strategy, and truth collided. Reporters whispered into microphones, trying to encapsulate the moment, a clash not merely of personalities, but of principles. The judge leaned forward, tapping the gavel, trying to restore order. "Order in the court," he intoned, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Jasmine returned to her seat, her composure intact, while Trump's energy now radiated strain, the veneer of invincibility cracking under scrutiny. In the quiet that followed, Jasmine allowed herself a mental acknowledgement. The first confrontation had been more than words. It was a battle of wills, of perception, and of moral weight. Trump had struck, but in striking, he had revealed vulnerabilities, fissures in the armor of power that could and would be exploited. Outside the courtroom, social media buzzed with every exchanged word. Hashtags trended, commentators debated, and the public collectively leaned forward, hungry for the next twist. Jasmine's resolve, calm under pressure, now met the first full force of opposition, and as the gavel marked the close of the session, she knew the real fight, the relentless, high-stakes, politically charged confrontation was only just beginning. The courtroom had grown taut with tension, like a string pulled to its absolute limit. Every eye in the room was fixed on Jasmine and Trump, the two central figures in a drama that had already begun to ripple far beyond the courthouse walls. Trump's voice had carried, sharp and commanding, but now the subtle undercurrent of unease was spreading, and even his closest allies began to sense it. The judge's eyes swept across the room with measured authority, the gavel poised but silent. The air seemed to vibrate with anticipation, a physical weight pressing down on every shoulder. "Mr. Trump," he said finally, his voice calm but firm, "this courtroom is not a stage for theatrics. Decorum will be maintained." The words, though quiet, resonated like a strike of lightning, piercing the charged atmosphere and demanding immediate attention. Trump leaned back in his chair, momentarily caught between defiance and reflection. He had faced criticism before, survived relentless scrutiny, yet the weight of live evidence, public attention, and Jasmine's composed authority created a pressure unlike any he had previously encountered. He smirked, attempting to mask the uncertainty with practiced arrogance, but the subtle furrow of his brow betrayed him. Jasmine remained standing, her posture impeccable, her eyes locked on the judge. She had anticipated this moment, the formal reminder of boundaries, the subtle attempt to rein in emotion and spectacle. But she also recognized its hidden power. The judge's warning lent gravity to her position, framing her not as a provocateur but as a measured seeker of truth. She allowed herself the briefest nod, acknowledging the authority of the court while maintaining the moral weight of her own mission. The courtroom seemed to exhale collectively, the quiet settling over rows of spectators and journalists like a soft fog. Trump's lawyers muttered amongst themselves, weighing strategy, recalculating how best to respond to the mounting pressure. Jasmine, meanwhile, began to pivot, letting the moment of quiet amplify her next moves. Every gesture, every word, every pause was deliberate, crafted to shift perception and emphasize the substance of evidence over spectacle. "You are here to answer for actions that affect the public trust," the judge continued, eyes narrowing slightly. "The court will tolerate neither intimidation nor evasion. This is not about theatrics, it is about accountability, truth, and the law." The words echoed against the high ceilings, carrying an almost cinematic resonance that seemed to settle over the courtroom. Like a mantle of inevitability, Jasmine spoke softly but firmly, letting the silence between sentences underscore the gravity of the moment. "With respect, Your Honor, accountability cannot be performed in whispers or hidden behind veneers of authority. Truth must be visible, undeniable, and actionable. It is what the people deserve." Her words, measured yet imbued with quiet fire, struck chords beyond the courtroom. Cameras captured every nuance, the subtle tightening of her jaw, the calm clarity in her gaze, the poised strength of her hands resting lightly on the table. Trump's smirk wavered for an instant, then returned, sharper, more deliberate, a calculated armor. Yet beneath it, the tension had shifted. The courtroom now understood that Jasmine was not only prepared for legal combat. She was a force anchored in principle, moral clarity, and meticulous preparation. The judge's words had underscored her credibility, framing her as the arbiter of reason amidst the theater of power. As the session continued, the courtroom seemed to hum with anticipation, each exchange, each objection, each glance between the two adversaries now carried double meaning, layers of strategy interwoven with moral stakes. Jasmine knew the warning had done more than maintain order. It had sharpened the focus of the entire chamber, crystallized the stakes, and positioned her authority not as challenge, but as unassailable fact. When the gavel finally struck to signal a brief recess, the energy in the room didn't dissipate, it thickened. Like storm clouds gathering before a thunderclap, Jasmine returned to her seat, her mind already racing, weighing the next steps. Outside, the press whispered rumors, calculated every angle, but inside, the real drama was just beginning. Truth, power, and accountability were in delicate balance, and Jasmine knew the next strike could tip the scales irrevocably. Asterisk. The courtroom reconvened, and a hush fell over the spectators. Every camera lens seemed to focus with a deliberate intent, capturing the precise moment when Jasmine Crockett would unveil the evidence she had guarded so carefully. Outside, the world waited with bated breath, millions of viewers watching live feeds, social media poised to explode at the slightest hint of scandal. The air inside was taut, thick with anticipation, every heartbeat amplified by the silent expectation. Jasmine rose from her seat, the movement deliberate and calm. She approached the central table with the files that contained the first revelation. a trove of documents and recordings exposing a series of secret financial maneuvers and clandestine communications. Her fingers brushed the papers lightly, each sheet imbued with the weight of consequence. She looked up, scanning the room, noting the faint flinch of Trump's eyes as he caught sight of the first folder. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady yet imbued with quiet intensity. "What I am presenting today is not conjecture. It is evidence verified, cross-referenced, and undeniable. It details a network of concealed activities designed to manipulate political outcomes and evade public scrutiny." The words hung in the air, drawing a collective intake of breath from the courtroom. Trump's lawyers shifted nervously, the first real crack in their armor beginning to appear. Trump leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table, trying to project control. But the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. "This is just theatrics," he said, his voice low, but edged with irritation. "You call papers evidence? Anyone can arrange documents to tell a story. Show me proof that holds up, beyond the headlines." Jasmine allowed a pause, letting the courtroom absorb the gravity of her words. She reached for a recording, sliding it across the polished surface toward the judge. "The proof is not only in writing," she said, her voice unwavering. "It is in the recorded communications, the internal messages that confirm intentions and actions taken in secrecy." A faint ripple passed through the spectators, the realization of the magnitude of her revelation settling in as the recording played. A hush enveloped the courtroom. Voices, conversations, and directives once thought private filled the room, exposing intentions carefully hidden from public view. Trump's expression tightened, a controlled mask faltering under the weight of audible proof. The spectators leaned in, their eyes widening. Reporters scribbled rapidly while the cameras panned across faces, capturing reactions that would soon be broadcast to millions. Jasmine's gaze never left the evidence. She had anticipated this moment, the precise arc of tension, the subtle shifts in power, the public revelation of concealed truths. "This is more than strategy," she said quietly, her words cutting through the murmurs. "It is accountability. It is a reminder that power carries responsibility, and secrecy cannot shield wrongdoing forever." Trump's lawyers exchanged hurried glances, their whispers barely audible. Jasmine knew they were recalculating, attempting to contain the damage, but the public display of truth had already begun to penetrate. Even the judge leaned forward, his eyes scanning the documents, absorbing the implications with measured authority. The courtroom remained silent for a long beat, the only sound the faint shuffle of papers and the hum of recording devices. Jasmine returned to her seat, exuding calm control. She had planted the first irreversible seed of exposure. Outside, social media erupted. Clips from the courtroom spread like wildfire, trending across platforms, dissected by commentators, analyzed by millions. The first revelation was not just a legal move. It was a spectacle of moral clarity, a strike that no counterattack could immediately erase. In the quiet that followed, Jasmine felt the faint surge of anticipation, knowing this was only the beginning. The storm had been unleashed, and every action from this point forward would escalate the collision between power and truth, secrecy and accountability. By the time the courtroom adjourned for a brief recess, the echoes of Jasmine Crockett's first revelation had already rippled far beyond the marble walls. Outside, reporters swarmed like a tide, their cameras and microphones capturing every fragment of reaction, every subtle expression from those leaving the chamber. Social media had exploded. Hashtags trended globally. Clips of the evidence circulated instantly, and analysts dissected every word in real time. Hashtag Crockett vs. Trump. Hashtag Hidden Truth. Hashtag Courtroom Bombshell became digital rallying cries, each one a testament to the seismic shift underway. The public outcry was immediate. News anchors, commentators, and political pundits debated passionately, weighing the gravity of the disclosures against Trump's decades-long cultivation of image and influence. Citizens crowded around screens in homes, cafes, and offices, their collective attention drawn to the courtroom as if it were the eye of a storm. Opinions splintered and converged in rapid succession. But one fact was undeniable. The world was watching, and Jasmine had become the center of the storm. In town halls and living rooms across the country, people discussed the implications in hushed, urgent tones. The first revelation was not just a legal matter, it was a moral challenge. Citizens questioned, debated, and reevaluated, sensing that secrecy, once thought untouchable, had been pierced by meticulous preparation and unwavering resolve. Every news cycle amplified the tension. Every clip circulated as evidence of accountability. In action. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere shifted as well. Spectators whispered amongst themselves, some astonished, others incredulous. Trump's legal team scuttled quietly behind documents and notes, scrambling to anticipate the next move, the next escalation. Even those previously loyal to his public persona began to register subtle cracks, hesitation in gestures, faltering phrases, micro-expressions betraying the strain of scrutiny. Jasmine, seated at the front with an unshakable calm, observed all of it with the precision of a seasoned strategist. Every reaction, every murmur was a signal, a vector of insight into the fragile construct of power she was systematically dismantling. The press, emboldened by the footage and evidence, pressed further. Live feeds amplified snippets of dialogue, clips of documents being slid across the courtroom, and Jasmine's measured, piercing declarations. Her calm authority contrasted sharply with the rising tension around her, creating a cinematic juxtaposition, the methodical force of truth against the spectacle of power under siege. Trump himself leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing as he scanned the room and glimpsed the cameras capturing every subtle twitch. His voice, low and deliberate, carried just enough to be heard by his advisors. This isn't just a courtroom, it's a public trial. Control the narrative, contain the fallout. But outside, the narrative had already escaped containment. Every live update, every viral clip reinforced the unfolding drama, amplifying Jasmine's moral authority and the undeniable power of evidence over rhetoric. Jasmine allowed herself a moment to absorb the pulse of the moment. This was more than public reaction. It was collective conscience, a reckoning that transcended individual personalities. The first revelation had shattered the illusion of secrecy, creating an unrelenting chain reaction that would define the course of the trial. Her strategy was working. The storm she had prepared for, anticipated, and harnessed was now fully in motion. As the gavel marked the resumption of proceedings, the courtroom felt smaller, tighter, more charged. Every eye now carried the weight of public scrutiny, every exchange amplified by the invisible audience beyond the walls. Jasmine rose again, her expression serene but resolute, ready to harness the momentum she had ignited. Outside, the world held its breath, knowing the confrontation between power and truth had only just begun. As the courtroom reconvened, the air seemed to thrum with anticipation. Every eye was fixed on Donald Trump, who now understood the stakes had escalated far beyond procedural formality. Jasmine Crockett had struck first, exposing hidden maneuvers and shaking public confidence. Now, the onus was on him to respond, to reclaim control, and to counter the momentum she had generated. His team of attorneys had whispered strategy in hushed tones, their energy tense, precise, almost desperate. As they recalibrated their approach, Trump rose deliberately, each movement theatrical yet calculated. His voice carried across the chamber, rich with bravado but threaded with the subtle undertone of urgency. "Let us not forget," he began, sweeping a hand toward the evidence Jasmine had presented, "that documents and recordings can be interpreted in many ways. Context matters, intent matters, and interpretation perception defines the narrative." The words were rehearsed, aimed at reframing the story, but Jasmine could detect the underlying tension, the cracks in the veneer of invulnerability. His legal team surged forward, presenting counter documents, alternative timelines, and selective excerpts meant to cast doubt on Jasmine's claims. Papers slid across polished tables, microphones picked up rapid-fire objections, and cameras captured every flicker of expression. The courtroom had become a battlefield of narratives, each carefully crafted to sway perception and undermine authority. Yet for all their maneuvers, the momentum Jasmine had built proved difficult to disrupt. Jasmine watched with sharp focus, observing every hesitation, every subtle expression, every misalignment of rhetoric. She noted the micro-expressions, the quick tightening of jaw muscles, the fractional narrowing of eyes, the imperceptible shift in posture that betrayed unease. In contrast, her own movements were measured, precise, almost ritualistic gestures of a lawyer fully in command, a strategist attuned to both legal detail and human psychology. Trump's strategy became more aggressive, aiming to destabilize rather than dismantle. "You claim the moral high ground," he said, his tone rising slightly. "Yet you present selective evidence. Who decides what the public should see? Who decides what is truth?" The courtroom shifted subtly, the question rhetorical but potent, designed to cast doubt on Jasmine's authority. But Jasmine did not flinch. She allowed a brief silence, letting the weight of his challenge hang uncomfortably in the room. Then she leaned slightly forward, voice clear and resolute. "Truth is not selective. It is not granted by power or obscured by theatrics. What is hidden will eventually emerge, and it is our duty, in this courtroom and to the public, to confront it directly. Context does not excuse deception. It clarifies accountability." Her words resonated, cutting through the dense tension like a scalpel, drawing the room's attention back to principle rather than performance. Trump's team faltered momentarily, adjusting their strategy in response to the precision and clarity of her rebuttal. The cameras captured every flicker of doubt, every calculated pause, every reaction from the spectators, who now seemed more alert, more engaged. Social media feeds surged with clips and commentary, amplifying Jasmine's authority and the undeniable power of evidence. The judge leaned forward, eyeing the escalating tension with measured caution. "Proceed with decorum," he instructed, his gavel tapping once for emphasis. Jasmine returned to her seat, exuding calm control, aware that Trump's maneuvers, while aggressive, had only confirmed the fragility of the narrative he had tried to control. As the courtroom settled, the subtle shift in power was palpable. Trump's defensive maneuvers had temporarily slowed the momentum, but they could not reverse it. Jasmine's careful strategy, her moral clarity, and her command of evidence had created a pressure that was both relentless and precise. The first salvo of confrontation had been met, but the storm was far from over. The stage was set for the next escalation, where revelation and confrontation would collide in full force. The courtroom settled into a tense rhythm, the quiet punctuated only by the soft rustle of papers and the low hum of microphones capturing every word. Jasmine Crockett rose again, her movements deliberate, exuding a calm authority that contrasted sharply with the flurry of activity around her. She approached the table where the next set of evidence lay, meticulously organized, each document, spreadsheet, and recording a thread in the web of concealed truth she was beginning to unravel. Trump leaned back in his chair, his expression oscillating between calculated composure and the faintest traces of unease. His legal team flitted about, shuffling papers, whispering strategy, trying to anticipate Jasmine's next move. But she had anticipated them, prepared for every challenge, and now she was about to escalate the confrontation in a way that would make the courtroom and the public take notice. "This next set of evidence," Jasmine began, her voice measured, but carrying the weight of inevitability, "reveals not only the hidden actions taken, but the deliberate intent behind them. These communications, internal memos, and financial directives expose a pattern of concealment and manipulation, coordinated to evade oversight and public scrutiny." She slid the first file across the table, letting it rest just within the judge's line of sight. The courtroom held its breath, aware that the stakes had just risen. Trump's team immediately objected, voices overlapping in practice dissonance. "Your Honor, this evidence is speculative, lacks proper foundation, and is highly prejudicial," the lead attorney insisted, eyes darting to Jasmine as though trying to intimidate her into faltering. Jasmine raised a single, steady hand. "With all due respect," she said, her tone quiet but firm, "the evidence is verified, corroborated by multiple independent sources, and directly relevant to the matter at hand. This is not speculation, it is fact. The public deserves transparency, and this court is tasked with ensuring it." The judge nodded slowly, his gaze steady, weighing the arguments with careful attention. "Proceed," he instructed, his voice calm but carrying authority. Jasmine returned to her files, pulling out a series of internal communications that mapped the decision-making processes. She had uncovered each line, each timestamp, each signature told a story of deliberate secrecy, of choices made to obscure accountability. As the courtroom absorbed the material, murmurs rippled through the spectators, reporters scribbled furiously, cameras zoomed in on expressions, and social media feeds exploded with live updates. Jasmine's careful orchestration had transformed the courtroom into a theater of transparency, where each revelation was a blow to the carefully maintained veneer of power. Trump's demeanor tightened, the first hints of frustration flickering. In micro-expressions his team struggled to conceal. He leaned forward, voice low, attempting to assert control. Selective evidence can mislead. Documents can be taken out of context. This does not define the entire truth. Jasmine met his gaze, unwavering, her voice firm and resolute. Truth cannot be contained by manipulation or selective disclosure. Every choice, every action, every hidden decision will surface when scrutiny is relentless. Context does not excuse evasion. It illuminates responsibility. The courtroom was charged with electricity. Spectators, journalists, and legal teams alike felt the magnitude of the evidence laid bare. Jasmine returned to her seat, allowing the moment to resonate, her calm demeanor belying the storm she had unleashed outside. Social media erupted anew, clips of her presentation circulating instantly, trending worldwide. The narrative had deepened, the stakes had intensified, and the pressure on Trump was palpable. In that charged silence, Jasmine understood that she had not merely presented evidence, she had shifted the trajectory of the trial, expanded the battlefield from the courtroom to the conscience of the public, and strengthened her position as the arbiter of accountability. The next confrontation would demand even greater precision, and she was ready. The courtroom felt smaller than ever, the air thick with anticipation, tension, and unspoken threats. Jasmine Crockett had methodically exposed layer after layer of hidden evidence, turning the trial into a high-stakes theater of accountability. Now, Trump's strategy shifted. The documents, the recordings, and the public spectacle had not swayed him to retreat. Instead, he moved to strike at the person who had dared challenge him. He rose slowly, deliberately, projecting the aura of calm control. "You've done a fine job playing the part, Ms. Crockett," he began, voice smooth but edged with venom. "But let's not confuse theatrics with credibility. You sit there, presenting evidence like a martyr of truth, yet behind that calm exterior lies ambition, ego, and the desire to be seen as some kind of hero. Who appointed you the judge of morality?" The courtroom stirred at the personal attack. Reporters leaned forward, scribbling furiously, cameras zooming in on Jasmine's face. Spectators exchanged uneasy glances, the tension palpable as the attack shifted from legal substance to character assassination. Even Trump's attorneys held their breath, sensing the razor's edge on which their client now balanced. Jasmine's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, her lips pressed in a controlled line. For a moment, she allowed the pause to stretch, letting the weight of his words settle in the courtroom. Silence, she knew, could be more powerful than any rebuttal. Then she stood, moving forward with a calm, deliberate grace that drew the room's attention. "Mr. Trump," she said evenly, her voice carrying across the chamber with unyielding clarity, "the question here is not my ambition, my ego, or my desire to be seen. The question is accountability, truth, and responsibility. If you wish to distract from the facts with personal attacks, so be it. But the facts remain. They are verified, undeniable, and consequential. My personal character is irrelevant to the revelations before this court." A murmur passed through the courtroom, subtle but pervasive. Spectators and journalists alike recognized the shift. Jasmine had turned the attack on its head, refusing to be destabilized while reinforcing the legitimacy of her position. Trump's smirk faltered briefly, an imperceptible flicker that suggested irritation at his own loss of psychological leverage. Trump leaned forward, lowering his voice with a conspiratorial intensity. "Don't think for a second that public opinion will let you escape scrutiny. People will question you, your motives, your methods. Everyone has a price for exposure." Jasmine's gaze remained locked on him, unwavering. her calm authority radiating throughout the chamber. Public scrutiny is inevitable for all. She replied softly but firmly, but truth is its own armor. Facts do not bend to rhetoric or intimidation. You may attempt to shift the conversation, to distract, to deflect, but the evidence stands, and history will remember actions, not words. The judge leaned forward, tapping the gavel lightly, a reminder of decorum and authority. The courtroom exhaled collectively, the tension releasing slightly. Yet the emotional resonance remained. Jasmine returned to her seat, calm, composed, yet charged with the quiet fire of moral certainty. Outside, social media erupted once more. Clips of Trump's personal attack and Jasmine's measured rebuttal circulated instantly. Trending across platforms, analysts debated her poise, her strategy, and the way she had absorbed and deflected a personal assault without losing control. Public opinion began to tilt, subtly but perceptibly, toward admiration for her composure and resolve. Inside the chamber, the stakes had shifted. The attack, meant to destabilize, had instead highlighted Jasmine's strength. The trial was no longer only about hidden evidence, it was about character, resilience, and the collision of ambition and integrity. And Jasmine knew the next confrontation would demand even greater skill, strategy, and moral clarity as the courtroom drama intensified. The courtroom had reached a moment of quiet intensity, the kind that presses on the chest, almost palpable, where every movement, every glance, every whispered word carries a weight that can tip the scales. Jasmine Crockett sat poised, her notes neatly arranged, her mind precise and steady. Yet the emotional current of the trial ran beneath her composed exterior. Today would mark a shift, a turning point that was no longer just legal, but deeply human. Trump's eyes flicked across the room, searching for an angle, a way to reclaim momentum. But Jasmine had anticipated his tactics, understood the rhythm of the confrontation, and now prepared to leverage something far more potent than documents or recordings: the undeniable moral clarity that emerges when truth confronts deception. She stood slowly, letting her calm presence dominate the space. Every camera, every spectator, every journalist felt the charge of anticipation. "Your Honor," she began, voice steady yet carrying an emotional undercurrent that hinted at the stakes beyond the law. "We speak here not only of concealed finances or political maneuvering. We speak of consequences that ripple far beyond these walls, consequences that touch real lives, real communities, and the very trust that binds citizens to their institutions." Trump's smirk faltered, the first crack in his psychological armor visible to the courtroom. He attempted to interrupt, but Jasmine held up a hand. Silent yet commanding, she gestured to the exhibits before her, the carefully curated documents and recordings, each line a testament to hidden intentions and actions taken in secret. "These are not just files," she continued. "These are lives affected, decisions that were made in shadows, away from the scrutiny of those who are meant to hold power accountable." The spectators stirred, leaning forward, sensing the shift from procedural argument to human stakes. The tension was cinematic, almost theatrical, yet grounded in raw reality. Jasmine's words carried a weight that transcended legal jargon, piercing the layers of rhetoric and control that Trump had so carefully maintained. He leaned forward, voice slightly louder, an attempt to reclaim authority. "This is manipulation. Emotion over facts. You aim to sway public perception, to create spectacle rather than reasoned judgment." Jasmine's gaze did not waver. "Emotion and fact are not mutually exclusive," she replied, her tone firm yet charged with sincerity. To ignore the human element in these revelations is to ignore the very purpose of accountability. Facts alone can reveal the structure, but context, consequence, and lived experience reveal the meaning. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Cameras captured Jasmine's subtle gestures, the slight tilting of her head, the deliberate rhythm of her speech, the calm fire in her eyes. Every spectator, journalist, and member of the public watching remotely felt the intensity of her presence, the moral gravity she projected. Trump's team whispered among themselves, recalibrating strategy. But even they sensed the shift. Jasmine had moved beyond confrontation. She had introduced moral clarity into the courtroom. a force that could not easily be countered with theatrics or legal maneuvering. The judge leaned forward, his expression thoughtful, absorbing not just the facts, but the emotional resonance of the testimony. Jasmine's calm authority, paired with the human consequences of hidden actions, had transformed the trial from a standard political confrontation into a theater of moral reckoning. As the gavel signaled a brief recess, Jasmine returned to her seat, breathing lightly but inwardly energized. Outside, social media exploded anew. Clips of her appeal to consequence and conscience circulated instantly, trending worldwide. Dissected and shared with commentary that ranged from awe to outrage, the emotional turning point had been struck, and the courtroom and the public would never see this confrontation the same way again.